Today on Book Break, we are talking about books with cult followings. And cult books is kind of a difficult term to define, but I think if you love a cult book, you will find yourself part of this tight-knit community of other people who also love this book, like a lot. So if you think that sounds fun, here are a bunch of books with cult followings for you to get obsessed with. So I had to start with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This is a 70s comedy sci-fi that over the years has pretty much moved from cult classic to just massive pop culture phenomenon. There have been enough adaptations to move this one into the mainstream, but you still have that core group of cult followers who can tell you what the meaning of Towel Day is, why the number 42 is so important, and probably own at least one piece of clothing with the slogan "Don't Panic" written on it. And in order to get any of those references, you are pretty much going to have to pick up this series. Although we did make a video with mega fan Jean from Jean Bookish Thoughts hosting, who will give you a bit of an introduction and some clues to what some of those references mean. You will find that video linked below, but for now let's move on to a definitely much less mainstream one, Oreo by Fran Ross. So this was a rediscovered cult classic. It was originally published in the 70s and then went out of print, and then was rediscovered and found a whole new group of readers. So this is the story of a young biracial woman setting out on a journey to find her missing father and unlock the mystery of her birth. And it's really fun. It's a tour through 70s pop culture. It's really feminist. It's a satirical exploration of racial identity, and on top of all of that, it is a loose retelling of the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. Now this next book, The Master and Margarita, is a book I haven't read, but literally everyone I know who's read it is obsessed with it and keeps telling me that I should read it as well. So from what I know about this book, it is about the devil disguised as a magician let loose on the city of Moscow, with a talking cat and an assassin as his companions. And nobody in this city even believes in the devil, even when they're confronted with him. But there are two main characters that they meet: the Master, who is this publicly denounced writer, and Margarita, his beautiful ex-lover. That is such an intriguing and over-the-top premise for a book, and I honestly don't know anyone who's read this book without completely falling in love with it. So it's definitely next on my to-read list. But next, for a much more divisive novel, The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book has a real Marmite, you either love it or you hate it effect on people. But people who are in team love it, which includes me, are like devoted to it. So this story is about a group of classics university students who have this really charismatic professor and form a very tight-knit group of friends. And they are pretentious, they are arrogant, they are selfish, they are such flawed, unlikable characters. But throughout the book you get so sucked in to their really dark world. And right from the beginning, literally on page 1, so it's not a spoiler, you find out that one of their group is going to die. And so the book is building up to what is going to go so terribly wrong. Something that I noticed a lot of the books on this list have in common is that a lot of them are very long. And I almost think that very long books are just destined to become cult classics, because it's such a mark of pride if you get through the whole book that you feel quite attached to it. So The Secret History is a long book, but even longer is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Now this book is a book within a book within a film within a book. There are so many layers. So our outer layer, we meet this man called Johnny who finds a manuscript, which is this academic study of a documentary film called The Neverton Record. So then in our second layer, we actually get to read this academic study, complete with footnotes and references and everything. For our third layer, we get transcripts of the documentary itself, which follows a family moving into this creepy house, which is bigger on the inside than the outside, and all sorts of weird things start happening. However, Johnny, on this outer layer, can't find any evidence that this film or the people in it ever existed. And that's not all that's in here. We also get letters from Johnny's mother, we get interviews with people associated with the film, we get interjections from editors. There are entire internet forums dedicated to this book, discussing everything from which order you're supposed to read it in, to which sections we're supposed to believe are true or not, how you're supposed to interpret it. It is a whole world. And while we're on the subject of long books, there are 720 pages in A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. So this tells the story of a man called Jude who has had the most terrible childhood and continues to suffer just the most awful abuse. It's about him and his close group of friends through the years. We follow their ups and downs, their hardships, but also these really beautiful moments of connection between the characters. But ultimately, through it all, Jude feels haunted by this trauma he's experienced and unsure if he'll ever be able to shake it off. And this book has recently developed a whole cult following on BookTube, where people are making these reading vlogs of themselves reading it and recording just how much they cry, because it is a very emotional book. But I also thought it was a really beautiful, thoughtful book. But next, for something much shorter, Pages for You by Sylvia Brownrigg tells the story of the beginning and the falling apart of a relationship. So our main character, Flannery, is only 17 when she meets the older woman, Anne, and becomes her student, both at her college and also in life. And this kind of love story is a story we've heard before, but I think the reason this book captured so many hearts is because of how brilliantly the emotion is rendered on the page. The passion that Flannery feels for the older, beautiful Anne, the obsessive feeling of being in love at that age, and the heartbreak of a relationship falling apart. And there was even a sequel written 20 years later called Pages for Her, which was very exciting for fans of this book. And now for one of our beautiful Macmillan Collector's Library editions, the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse had a massive cult following in the 1960s, particularly within the hippie movement. So Siddhartha tells the story of a man setting out on a journey of spiritual enlightenment and self-discovery, so you can see why that was so popular with hippies. The book is still considered one of those books that everyone should read at least once in their lifetime, because we follow the main character through so many different phases of his self-discovery that every single reader is bound to get something slightly different from the experience of reading it. Now, I of course had to include the author Haruki Murakami, who is just a cult author. People who love him love him. So really any of his books would have fit the bill, but let's go with Kafka on the Shore, which again, disclosure, is a book I haven't read but have heard so much about from people who are obsessed with, and still haven't quite been able to figure out what it's about. I think that's maybe another trademark of a lot of cult classics, is slightly weird books. If you can figure out what a weird book like this is about, you're going to be attached to it for life. But let's give it a go at explaining it. So from what I've heard, it's about a boy who runs away from home to find his missing mother and sister. It's got talking cats in it. It's got a sort of Oedipal prophecy, and there are lots of different ways to interpret it. I really should read it. And then for another cult author, I had to mention Octavia E. Butler. She was one of the first black women to publish science fiction, and this, Kindred, her most famous popular novel, is actually this genre-bending book that combines sci-fi with historical fiction, with fantasy, with slave memoir. So in 1976, we meet our main character, Dana, a young woman who has just turned 26, when she is yanked back in time to 1815 and has to save a young white boy called Rufus from drowning. And it turns out that Rufus is going to end up being related to her, and so Dana keeps getting pulled back and forth in time to keep him alive long enough to have the children that will end up being part of Dana's family line. But as Rufus grows up and becomes a slave owner, Dana realises quite how complicated this challenge is that she's been set. And finally, I couldn't resist, let's end with a cult book about a cult, Masters of Atlantis by Charles Portis, which is about a young American man who accidentally founds a cult. And Charles Portis is such a funny writer, so this book is just filled with hilarious and eccentric characters, but presented in such a deadpan way. But now we'd like to hear from you. Which books do you think will become cult classics in the future? Leave us a comment below and let us know your thoughts. And if bookish debates like that are your thing, we actually have a whole playlist of videos like that, which I will link to, so click through and have a browse. See you next time!